Today I'm going to show you how to make a tube rivet. I've got two scrap pieces of metal here. This copper heart, it already has a kind of a nick in it, like an old drill hole, but we'll just ignore that. And I'm going to connect the copper heart to a brass background. First, I'm going to mark with a thin Sharpie where I want all of my rivets to be, making sure that they overlap on both pieces of metal. Then I need to dent the metal where I would like to drill the holes. Notice I'm using my hammer and awl on the metal on a steel plate. I'm going to drill my holes, and I need to make sure that the drill bit is the same width, the same gauge as the tubing that I'm going to use for my rivets. I have a flex shaft in my home studio I'm using, but I recommend using the drill press to make sure that the drill bit goes straight up and down and not at a slight angle, which can happen when you're drilling with a flex shaft by hand. After you drill the holes, you're going to want to sand the back. The sand usually has some burrs. Or you could use a gray wheel in the back room if you're at school, and you could use that to sand down the back of the sheet of metal really quickly. It's a lovely tool. So now I'm lining up my two pieces of metal and dotting with a Sharpie through just one of them. And notice I'm making a dent in just one hole for my back piece of metal and drilling it with my drill. Now I'm going to take the tubing and fit it through both pieces of metal to make sure it fits. The length of tubing that I need is 1 millimeter hanging out of each side, and each piece of metal, I estimate, is about 1 millimeter thick. Using the tube cutter, I'm going to unscrew the back screw to loosen the measurement gauge here. Now, where this thin line is where my saw blade is going to go. So from the end to that line is where I want to measure how long I need my tubing to be cut. I'm going to cut mine 4 millimeters long because 1 millimeter for each piece of metal and 1 millimeter sticking out of each side. So that's 4 millimeters. So I'm going to push this lever over on top. I'm going to take my left hand and hold the handle with my left hand with my thumb over the lever. And since I'm right-handed, I'm going to use my right hand to saw that tube. Here's my little piece. I'm going to carefully line them up and grab that little piece of tubing and start to fit it in the hole. Then I'm going to use my awl to stick it in the hole of the tube and kind of shimmy it in through the hole. So now I have it through both pieces of metal. If your tubing is a little too long, make sure you file it flat, okay? It's flat because we cut it on a tube cutter, but mine was a little bit too long. One of my pieces of metal was thinner than 22 gauge, so I need to make the tubing a little shorter. So you'll notice I took my awl and I'm trying to kind of open up the ends of the tubing. I can put my awl in the tube and gently tap it with my hammer, and it'll spread the end of the tube out a little bit. So now I'm ready to hammer my tube rivet so it's connecting the metal. I'm going to start with the ball end of my hammer and tap, tap, tap the tubing that's sticking out of the top of the metal. Then I'm going to flip it over, push the metal down, very important, push the metal down so the tubing is sticking out of the end now, and tap, tap, tap with the ball end of the hammer again. Flip it over, push the metal down, and now I can use the flat end of the hammer to finish the rivet. So I need to do it again. I need to drill through one of the top holes to the bottom sheet of metal, because remember, we only drilled one hole on the bottom sheet of metal. And now I'm just going to cut the rest of the tubing, because now I know that for me, I needed to shorten this tubing just a little bit, because it was a little too long the first time. So I shortened it a little on the tube cutter, and now I'm cutting the remaining pieces of tubing that I need to create the rest of my rivets for my piece. I've got all my pieces of tubing, and now I'm going to take another one and push it through the hole to start, and then grab the awl and gently use that to kind of push it through both pieces of metal. Again, once it's through both pieces of metal, I need to widen the ends of the tubing. Here I'm just using the awl because my tubing is aluminum. It's very soft. But if it's copper or brass, you're going to have to put the awl in the tip of the tubing and tap it gently with the hammer to expand the end of the tube. So you can see I'm creating my rivet again, starting with the ball end of the hammer and then changing to the flat end of the hammer, and I've created my tube rivet. Now I just repeat this again and again and again until I have finished with all my tube rivets. Remember, you drill a hole, then rivet it. Drill a hole, then rivet it. So it's wise to get in the habit of using the awl at the very beginning when you put the tubing in and tap it gently with the hammer to spread out the ends of that tubing. And then tap, tap, tap with the ball end of the hammer, flip it over, push the metal down, tap, 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 and then use the flat end of the hammer to finish off the rivet. Again, repeating this over and over until you finally finish creating all of the rivets in your metals piece. Finally, the finished piece. I have 5 tube rivets. I can certainly sand it if I need to and polish.